The law does not allow me to have 2 wives, yet I must and I will have 2. My development as an artist depends on my having both you and Patricia. Arguably, the 2 most important figures in Stanley Spencer's life were his 2 wives, Hilda Carline and Patricia Preece, and these 2 relationships are examined in the Stanley Spencer Gallery's Love, Art, Loss, The Wives of Stanley Spencer. The exhibition explores one of the most peculiar stories in British art history, the bizarre love triangle that existed between Spencer and his 2 wives, as well as the effect these women had on Spencer's practice, resulting in some of the most avant-garde works of the time.
Stanley Spencer was primarily an autobiographical artist, and his relationships with these 2 women were a huge influence on his artistic output. Some of the most extraordinary images in modern British art history were produced by this eruption in his life. The leg of mutton nude at Tate, the series of nudes, the emotional outpouring was of massive influence to future generations of artists, from Freud to Bacon to Tracey Emin. His influence has been long-lasting and of prime importance in modern British art history. Stanley first met Hilda at an artistic soiree at her parents' house in Hampstead, and he felt this overwhelming sense of love and passion for her. Their engagement followed a few years later, but it was not an easy ride. He was always sort of constricted, if you like, by his feelings and torn between the love of her and his hometown of Cookham. And one day when he saw her being fitted for her wedding dress, he got completely cold feet and said, it's all off. And in the exhibition we have a lovely drawing of her having her wedding dress fitted. She was his spiritual love, but from the very beginning they had an incredibly complex relationship. She was quite tricky, prone to depression, and Spencer was a completely overwhelming personality. He loved the sound of his own voice, and it led to a very uneasy dynamic between the 2 of them. Hilda Carline was an extremely accomplished artist in her own right, and one of the major loans we've got for this exhibition is Hilda's self-portrait. And here you've got this stunning young woman, full of self-confidence, showing herself in her bedroom cum studio in Hampstead, and she's got her professional brush and palette next to her, and she has real confidence. And you can see in many ways her style is very similar to Stanley's, but rather freer. They set off on married life, ultimately. They were married in 1925 at Wangford Church in Suffolk, where Hilda had been a land girl. It was a place that held great resonance for her. She loved her time as a land girl there. And thereafter, things became a little trickier. Stanley went on to Berks to work on the Sand Memorial Chapel, and Hilda gave up her work as an artist. She found it very difficult to paint there. And it was a bit of a roller coaster. Things went up and down. Hilda went back to Hampstead to have their daughter Unity. When she came back, things got rather better, and they painted some really beautiful drawn sketches of each other in the nude. And then a short time afterwards, Stanley did a sketch of Hilda with her hair down, which is in this exhibition. And she's a woman who looks vulnerable and hunted and completely ill at ease with herself. They struggled along, but one of the things that became tricky at that time as well was Hilda's faith in Christian Science. Now, Christian Science was a religion whereby one put a lot of store into the otherworldly, the unreal, the spiritual, whereas Stanley was the absolute opposite of that. For him, it was about bringing the heavenly down to earth, the empirical. So here we have Granny Tub in the place where Spencer was born, Cookham, and she sunk to her knees. She was so frightened by the sunset caused by Halley's Comet, she thought the apocalypse was nigh. And Spencer's painted her surrounded by these heavenly beings who offer to her the things she most loves, paintings and drawings and roses. And here you have Spencer's cousin Annie Slack, who ran the shop holding a stack of postcards, and also the grocer. And so here we have Cookham as a place which is heaven on earth, where the extraterrestrial happens, and for Spencer it sums up his Cookham feelings.
Spencer's life changed forever in 1929 when he met Patricia Preece, who was living in Cookham with her partner Dorothy Hepworth. The bold, striking Preece had an immediate hold over Spencer, reputedly using her sexuality to manipulate him, accepting expensive gifts and appearing semi-dressed in his company.
Patricia's family setup in Cookham was quite complicated. She lived with her partner Dorothy Hepworth, who had trained with her at the Slade, and then they had moved to Paris, where they had also studied art. They frequented lesbian artistic salon, and then moved back here and set up a home together. They were supported by Dorothy's immensely wealthy family, who in 1930 were then bankrupted by the economic crash. This meant that their life here was incredibly impoverished. They really struggled to make ends meet. And it fell upon Patricia to market their work. And what happened was, Patricia, being glamorous, overwhelming, amenable, she ended up signing Dorothy's paintings so that they could be sold and she would market them. Now, comparing Hilda and Patricia, you can start to begin to see why Spencer was so drawn to her. Looking at contemporary photographs, she's an immensely glamorous figure. You wouldn't necessarily see that looking at Spencer's paintings of her, and actually conventional beauty was not something that Stanley really took to heart. For him, love took many forms, and it wasn't conventional beauty that was the be-all and end-all for him. So from 1933, the first painted portrait of Patricia by Stanley we've got in the exhibition, and she completely subsumes the whole canvas, her gnarled hand coming right into the foreground of the picture, and his obsession for her really oozes out of the picture.
Cookham was essential for Spencer's spiritual and artistic well-being. For him, it was like heaven on earth, and the glamorous and confident Preece became synonymous with Spencer's beloved village. As such, she assumed a significant religious and symbolic relevance for the artist.
One of the paintings we have in the exhibition shows Patricia on Cockmarsh Hill, and it shows her wearing an amethyst and diamond necklace that Spencer had bought for her, which Spencer describes in a letter, and he says how beautiful she looks and how the necklace chimes with the flowers behind her in the meadow. Initially, Spencer had intended showing her on the hill 8 times in the nude, but at the last minute changed his mind and showed just her with her grossly attenuated hand sticking into the foreground. It's a powerful religious feeling that Spencer has for Cookham and his muse. In the end, the divorce went through, and 4 days later, Stanley married Patricia in Maidenhead Registry Office. Their witnesses were James Wood, another modern British artist who had attended the Carline artistic soirees in Hampstead, and also Patricia's lover, Dorothy Hepworth. And there's a photograph of them all, and I think it's probably one of the most dysfunctional photographs in the history of art. So after the wedding, Patricia went off on honeymoon, which had been booked in Cornwall, and Stanley had to stay behind to finish off a commission. So Patricia went off that night with Dorothy Hepworth, leaving Stanley in Cookham to finish off his commission. As it happened, Hilda came too and stayed with Stanley to support him whilst he finished, and so he spent his wedding night to Patricia with Hilda. And this gave Patricia the most marvellous excuse to not cohabit with Stanley. She was able to resume her life with Dorothy as she had wanted. And he was desolate, he was left on his own. So for a man who had set out wanting 2 wives, something he had said he wanted this carnal, life-giving, fulfilled existence with Patricia, and also the more spiritual, steady and balanced existence with Hilda, he was left with no one. Thereafter followed some of the most raw and meaningful expressions of his personal and artistic despair. He was completely alone. And then we get this extraordinary series of paintings called the Beatitudes of Love, showing love at its most ugly, its most raw, and for sure they must have been influenced to some extent by new objectivity in Germany, in the sense that not everything in life was beautiful. It's raw, and actually for Spencer beauty didn't matter. It was all about being oneself, and these grotesque figures for him meant more than the ideal platonic ideal of beauty.
The aftermath of this losing both wives not only led to an artistic eruption, but also a resumed affection and closeness with Carline through their letters. Indeed, when she died of cancer in 1950, Spencer continued to write to her, their union elevated to the spiritual rather than the physical. Yet, such rekindling was not to be had with Preece being man and wife in name only. Refusing his attempts at divorce, she held out to become Lady Spencer when he was knighted in 1959, the year of the artist's death.
In this exhibition, we're really trying to reappraise the way we look at Spencer's relationships with his 2 wives. Hitherto, it's been very easy to blame Spencer for how he behaved towards Hilda in this extraordinary ménage à trois. It's actually much more complicated than that. And human relationships are very grey, and actually Hilda was incredibly complicated as well, and it seems from the outset that actually they weren't terribly well suited. So we're trying to recast Spencer not as a demon, but actually as someone struggling to make his relationship work and captivated by someone who is ultimately a temptress.